What if I told you the most terrifying patient I ever treated wasn't even human? What if I told you that within the walls of a prison hospital something existed that had no record, no file, and no explanation? You've heard stories of violence, of riots, of inmates who lost control. But this wasn't any of those. This wasn't madness. This wasn't illness. It was something else entirely. I saw shadows move where no one stood. I heard screams that no door should have been able to contain. And when I finally faced it, I realized I wasn't locked in with a prisoner at all. That night, I was locked in with something else. Prisons are designed to contain chaos. Thick concrete, iron bars, steel doors, all built to keep violence under control. But what they don't tell you is that those same walls also hold on to something else. Silence, heavy and suffocating, like the building itself is waiting for you to slip. On my first night shift in the infirmary, the details that should have felt ordinary didn't. The overhead lights buzzed with a low electric hum that never stopped. Every flicker across the ceiling felt like a warning. The stench of disinfectant clung to everything, but beneath it lingered something sour, something old, like rot that no amount of bleach could erase. When the guards moved through the hall, their boots struck the floor in unison, echoing down the corridor until it sounded like there were more of them than there should have been. Each slam of the iron doors reverberated through my chest, reminding me that I was sealed inside as much as the men I was supposed to treat. I was a nurse, trained, steady, professional. I had seen overdoses, stabbings, and the aftermath of brutal fights. But the infirmary was different at night. The hall stretched longer than it should have. The shadows never seemed to fall in the same place twice. The building breathed, creaked, and groaned as though it had its own pulse. And then there was the isolation. After midnight, when the last patrols thinned out, it was just me and the patients. No backup, no quick escape, just the heavy buzz of the lights, the ticking of the wall clock, and the slow realization that if something went wrong in here, I would face it alone. That night, it wasn't the inmates I was afraid of. It was the feeling that the infirmary itself was waiting, watching, as though the next door to open wouldn't be opened by human hands. Hospitals are never truly quiet. Even in the dead of night, there's always a rhythm. The steady beeping of monitors, the hiss of oxygen lines, the creak of gurneys shifting on their wheels. But in the prison infirmary, the rhythm was broken. It felt wrong, like the building had a pulse of its own, and it was beating out of sync. The first thing I noticed was a bed in the corner, empty. Sheets folded hours earlier, neatly tucked by my own hands. But when I passed by again, the blanket was pulled halfway down, wrinkled like someone had been lying there. I froze, listening. Nothing. Just the buzz of the lights overhead. I smoothed the sheets, told myself it was nothing more than my imagination, and kept moving. Minutes later, one of the heart monitors crackled to life. Its jagged green line blinked across the screen, pulsing, irregular. But the bed beside it was empty. No patient, no sensors attached. Just the machine, alive when it shouldn't be. I pulled the plug from the wall, but even after it powered down, the sound of the flatline lingered in my head, like an echo refusing to fade. That's when I heard it, a whisper, faint, muffled, coming from the ceiling vents. I stopped breathing, straining to catch the words, but they weren't in any language I recognized, just low, broken tones. At first, I thought it was another inmate, maybe a trick, but when I followed the sound, it moved, slipping through the ducts, always just out of reach, like it knew I was chasing it. Later that night, an older guard came by to check the wing. His uniform was worn, his eyes heavy. He leaned against the doorway and shook his head. "This wing is cursed," he muttered. "You'll see." He didn't stay long, just dropped those words like a warning and left me to the silence again. I laughed it off in the moment, but deep down, it didn't feel like a joke. By the time I returned to the infirmary, the air felt heavier. My shoes scraped against the floor louder than before, every sound amplified in the emptiness. And then I saw it, a figure in the far corner, motionless, standing perfectly still in the dark. My chest tightened, every muscle locked. I whispered out a shaky hello. No answer. The shape didn't move, it just stood there. Step by step I crept closer, my breath shallow, palms slick with sweat. And as the overhead light swung across the room, the figure took shape. An IV pole, just metal, just equipment, nothing more. I let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding my body. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wanted me to see that shadow first, before it showed me the real thing. If you'd have checked twice in that dark corner, hit subscribe, and if you think you'd walk away without looking, tell me in the comments. Just after 1 in the morning, the infirmary doors opened again. 2 guards stepped in, dragging an inmate between them. His wrists were cuffed, his ankles chained, but he moved stiffly, like the restraints weren't what slowed him down, like he was moving at a rhythm entirely his own. They told me he'd been in a violent outburst. No explanation, no medical notes, just handle him. The guards wouldn't meet my eyes. One of them muttered under his breath, words that chilled me more than the prisoner himself. Don't let him talk to you. The inmate was unlike any I had seen. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight across sharp bones. He refused food, refused water, his lips barely moving except to release a faint, wheezing breath. But his eyes were wrong, too dark, so dark they swallowed the light around them, reflecting nothing back at me. When I met his gaze, it felt less like looking at a man and more like standing on the edge of a void. The guards strapped him down to a bed and left quickly, not even pretending to hide their unease. The door slammed behind me, and I was alone with him. My training took over. I moved closer, checked his vitals, tried to maintain control of the situation. But with every step closer, the temperature seemed to drop. My breath grew visible in the air, as if I'd walked into a freezer. I placed my stethoscope against his chest. The heartbeat was there, but irregular. Too slow one moment, too fast the next, like 2 different rhythms fighting each other. His pulse, when I touched his wrist, was colder than metal. I pulled my hand back instinctively, rubbing my fingers to bring back warmth. Then it happened. I hadn't spoken my name, not once. But from the bed, in a voice so faint I almost thought I imagined it, he whispered my full name. Every syllable perfectly pronounced. My knees went weak. I demanded to know who told him, how he knew me, but he only stared. His lips curved slightly, not a smile, not a frown, just the awareness that he had unsettled me. I tried to hook him up to the EKG. The moment the leads touched his skin, the monitor flatlined. A long, shrill tone filled the infirmary. My heart lurched, he was breathing, his chest rose and fell, but the screen told me he was gone. I tore the leads away, and the machine flickered back to life, normal as though nothing had happened. Every instinct in me said this wasn't medical. This wasn't illness or psychosis. This was something else. But in that room, with the steel door sealed shut behind me, none of that mattered. All I could do was keep breathing, keep working, and pretend I wasn't trembling inside. And all the while, his eyes never left mine. Too still, too steady, like he was waiting for me to make the mistake of blinking first. Would you have stayed in the room with him? If yes, subscribe. If no, comment what you'd do instead. Then, without warning, the alarms went off. A shrill, metallic wail tore through the halls, followed by the thunder of boots on concrete. A riot had broken out in another block. Over the radio, voices barked frantic orders, codes I barely understood. And then the words that made my blood run cold. All non-essential personnel. Lockdown. Stay in place. I wasn't essential. Not to them. Not during chaos. That meant the doors sealed, the guards vanished, and I was locked inside the infirmary. With him. The fluorescent lights above flickered, buzzing louder, struggling against the sudden draw of emergency power. One by one they dimmed, until only a few strips glowed faintly, washing the room in a sickly yellow haze. The hum of the backup generator filled the silence, low and steady, like the growl of something alive beneath the floor. The inmate lay perfectly still on the bed, his wrists strapped, his ankles bound. But then the sound started. At first, a faint vibration in the air, so low I thought it was just the generator. But no, the sound grew sharper. It was humming, a tune I didn't recognize. The strange part, his chest rose and fell, his breath moved, but his lips didn't. The humming came from him, but his mouth never moved. I backed away slowly, my pulse hammering. The sound crawled across the walls, echoed in the vents, filling every corner of the infirmary. Then came the whispers, dozens of them, maybe more. Too many voices to count, all rising in unison, coming from behind the walls. The vents rattled, the pipes moaned, as if the voices were traveling through the very structure of the building. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my skull, burrowing deep, whispering words I couldn't make sense of, words that didn't belong in any language I knew. Desperate for something to ground me, I looked back at the bed. That's when I saw it. On the steel frame, just beneath where his hands were strapped, scratches carved deep into the metal. My stomach turned as I bent closer to read them, the letters jagged, uneven, etched like claws had made them. Not human. Don't trust. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The inmate hadn't moved. His eyes were closed now, his body unnaturally still. But the message was there, fresh, as if someone or something wanted me to find it right then. The humming stopped all at once, cutting off so suddenly the silence itself felt deafening. And in that silence, I realized something I should never have admitted out loud. I wasn't afraid of the riot. I wasn't afraid of the chaos outside. I was afraid of what I was locked inside with. The infirmary was never truly silent, but suddenly it was. The alarm stopped, the generator's hum faltered. Even the radios, which had been spitting static and frantic voices only minutes before, cut off without warning. Dead air, every channel, every frequency. It was as if the outside world no longer existed, or worse, as if I no longer existed to it. I turned toward the patient. He hadn't moved since they strapped him down, or so I thought. His wrists were still bound, his ankles chained, but he was standing, upright, on the far side of the bed. The restraints hadn't been unclipped, the chains hadn't broken. They were simply hanging through him, like they no longer mattered. My legs locked and a cold sweat traced down my spine. I should have screamed, but nothing came out. Then he spoke. No, they spoke. Multiple voices at once, rising from his throat in a chorus that should never come from a human body. Some low, rumbling, deep enough to shake the floor. Others high, almost childlike, broken by laughter that made my skin crawl. All of them speaking at once, layered over each other, every word overlapping. I couldn't tell if it was English or something else entirely, but I felt the meaning all the same. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to know he existed. His shadow stretched across the floor, longer than the light could have cast it, crawling up the wall, spilling into the corners like liquid darkness. It bent at angles no shadow should bend, as if the thing behind him was taller, wider, more grotesque than the frame of the man in front of me. I ran to the door. The steel handle turned beneath my hand, and the lock clicked open, but the door wouldn't move. I pulled, slammed my shoulder into it, kicked at the base. It was unlocked, yet it held firm, like invisible hands pressed it shut from the other side. Panic welled in my chest. I was trapped, sealed in with him. From down the hall, a sound cut through the silence, screams, dozens of them, men shouting, crying, begging for help. The unmistakable clanging of fists against bars. I staggered back from the door. Those wings had been emptied during lockdown. Every prisoner accounted for. That block should have been silent. But the screams grew louder, echoing through the air vents, bouncing off the walls, building until it felt like the entire prison was alive with agony. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the voices wouldn't stop. And when I looked back at the patient, he was smiling. Not with his lips, with his eyes. His chest never moved with breath, but the chorus of voices swelled louder, feeding on my fear, waiting for me to break. If you were the nurse, would you keep your eyes on him or look for a way out? Comment below. And if you'd never last, subscribe because you'll need more stories like this to prepare. I realized too late what was happening. The way it stared at me without blinking, the way the air grew colder every time I faltered. It wasn't just watching me, it was feeding on me. Feeding on every stutter in my breath, every shake in my hands, every thought I couldn't control. The fear didn't weaken it. The fear made it stronger. And then the lights went out. Not a flicker, not a dimming, just gone. The world was swallowed in black, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be completely blind. I couldn't see my hands, I couldn't see the bed, I couldn't even see the faint glow of the exit sign. There was nothing, nothing but sound. That's when I heard it. Breathing, slow, heavy, but not mine. It came from the corner, then from the ceiling, then from right behind me. I froze. My chest burned as I tried to hold my own breath, to separate my sound from his. But the breathing continued, wet and guttural, brushing against the back of my neck as if something leaned close enough to taste the air I exhaled. Then, cold. Fingers pressed into my shoulders. Not one hand, two, firm, ice cold, nails digging just enough into my skin to remind me they were real. I spun around, nothing, no one, just blackness pressing in on all sides. But the hands, I could still feel where they'd been, the chill sinking deep into my bones. I turned back toward the bed, empty. The restraints dangled loose, swaying gently, as if someone had just slipped free. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I lifted it, and before I could even steady the beam, he was there, inches from my face. Too close, too fast. His eyes swallowed the light, his smile stretched wider than a human mouth should allow, and then he whispered. Not loud, not booming, just soft, certain, spoken like a promise. You're not leaving. The words weren't just in my ears, they were inside me, crawling through my skull, twisting around every thought. My knees buckled, the flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam rolling across the wall. And then, the alarms blared. A sudden eruption of sirens tore through the silence, red strobes flashing across the infirmary. Power surged back with a violent hum, the lights buzzing to life, the machines rebooting in unison. I blinked, blinded by the sudden glare, searching every corner of the room. The bed was empty. The restraints lay across the sheets, unfastened, untouched. No footprints, no sign he had ever been there at all. Only the faint echo of that whisper still ringing in my ears. And in that moment, I wasn't sure which terrified me more. The thought that he was gone, or the thought that he was still in the room, watching from somewhere I couldn't see. When the lights returned, I thought the nightmare might finally be over. But that was the moment the real horror began. The infirmary doors burst open. Guards flooded the room, flashlights slicing through every corner, radios crackling back to life with clipped orders. I braced myself for questions, for shouts, for explanations, but instead, nothing. Their beams swept over the room like it was any other night. The bed was neatly made, the restraints coiled perfectly on the mattress. Not a single mark, not a single clue that anyone or anything had been there. I tried to explain. I told them about the humming, the whispers, the shadow. I pointed to the scratches on the bed frame, the words carved into steel. But when I looked again, they were gone. Smooth metal, untouched. The guards exchanged glances, muttered under their breath. One of them finally snapped, "There was no patient here tonight. Get back to work." I refused to let it go. I demanded records, intake logs, any proof he had been processed into the infirmary. The head nurse looked me dead in the eye and said the words that froze me to my core. "We never received a transfer. No inmate by that number exists." He didn't even check the files. It was like he already knew what I would find. Still, I checked. I searched the records myself, and he was right. There was nothing. No intake sheet, no medical file, no incident report. Officially, the man I treated that night never existed at all. In the days that followed, I tried to walk away. I told HR I was done, that I couldn't stay another night inside those walls. But when they pulled up my file, half of it was gone. Missing. My resignation letter was never acknowledged. My requests for transfer disappeared before anyone could see them. Every time I pushed harder, the same phrase came back: "Forget it, or you won't last long here." Other staff avoided me in the halls. Conversations stopped when I walked in. The ones who dared to speak offered only hushed warnings. A guard whispered once, as he passed me on his way to shift, "We've all seen it. Pretend you didn't. If you want to stay alive, pretend." That's when I realized the cover-up wasn't for me. It wasn't to protect me from the truth. It was to protect them, to protect whatever that thing was. Because if he wasn't recorded, if he wasn't processed, then he was free to move through those walls whenever he wanted. And no one would ever admit it. If you think this was just a hallucination, comment why. But if you believe things walk among us that aren't human, subscribe, because I have more stories they don't want you to hear. For weeks after that night, I couldn't shake it. The memory clung to me like a second skin. Every slam of a door echoed too loudly. Every shadow stretched too far. I kept replaying the same question in my mind. If he wasn't an inmate, then what was he? And why was I the one who had to see him? I used to believe that prisons were built to contain danger, that the bars, the locks, the cameras kept us safe. But that night taught me something else. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a prison isn't the inmates. It's what hides in the dark with them. Things that don't follow rules, things that aren't written down, things that feed on silence and fear. Eventually I left, or at least I thought I had. I moved across town, found an apartment far from the gates, far from the sound of sirens and metal doors. I told myself I was free of it, that the past would stay locked where it belonged. But one night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. Faint at first, almost like my memory playing tricks on me. A humming, low, steady. The same tune I had heard in the infirmary, the one that never came from human lips. My stomach turned to stone. I forced myself to sit up to listen closer. And that's when I realized it wasn't in my head, it was coming from outside. I walked to the window slowly, each step heavier than the last. The city was quiet. The street below was empty. But the sound was there, unmistakable, drifting in through the glass, humming, waiting, as if it had followed me home. I pressed my hand against the curtain, ready to pull it back. But I stopped, because deep down I already knew what I'd see if I did. I wasn't locked in anymore. The walls, the bars, the gates, they'd meant nothing. Whatever I faced in that infirmary had never been trapped. It had been free all along, and now it was outside my window. What do you think that thing was? Share your theory in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story isn't over.